El Chapo daily life inside ADX Florence, America's most secure prison. There is a place in America where silence isn't peace, it's punishment. A prison so controlled, so isolating, that some inmates describe it as disappearing while still alive. No gangs. No movement. No freedom. Just concrete, steel, and your own mind. And inside one of those cells sits one of the most powerful drug lords in modern history, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. But what does power look like when everything is taken away? What happens when a man who once commanded empires is reduced to a number behind a steel door? Arrival, when the world ends. When El Chapo arrived at ADX Florence in 2019, it wasn't just a transfer. It was an ending. After multiple prison escapes in Mexico, including one through a mile-long tunnel, U.S. authorities made a decision. No risks. No mistakes. No second chances. ADX Florence, often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies, was designed for one purpose: control. Every movement planned. Every second monitored. The moment he stepped inside, the rules changed forever. Gone were the days of influence, bribery, and communication networks. Here, even a whisper struggles to travel. And the first thing that hits most inmates isn't fear. It's silence. But what does that silence actually feel like over time? The cell, a world of concrete. El Chapo's world is now about 87 square feet. That's smaller than most bedrooms. The cell is made almost entirely of poured concrete. The bed is concrete. The desk is concrete. Even the stool is part of the floor. There are no bars, only a thick steel door with a narrow slit. Inside, there is a small window. But it doesn't show freedom. It shows sky. Only sky. The design is intentional. No view of the ground. No view of other inmates. No visual connection to life beyond the walls. Time becomes difficult to measure. Days blur together. And the question begins to form. How long can a human mind function in a place like this? The daily routine, controlled to the second. Every day inside ADX follows a strict, repetitive structure. El Chapo wakes up alone. There are no alarms. No guards shouting. Just the slow realization that another identical day has begun. Meals arrive through the slot. No conversation. No eye contact. Just a tray, pushed through steel. The food is basic. Nutritionally sufficient, but far from enjoyable. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, always alone. And then there's time. Endless time. Inmates are allowed a few books. Some may have access to a television, but only educational or approved content. No internet. No calls unless tightly monitored. And movement? Almost none. But once a day, there is a brief change. And it's not as relieving as it sounds. Recreation, the empty cage. For about 1 hour a day, inmates may be allowed recreation. But this isn't freedom. It's another form of confinement. El Chapo is escorted, alone, to a small outdoor enclosure. High walls. A mesh ceiling. No interaction. No one to speak to. Some inmates describe it as being placed inside a concrete box, within another concrete box. You can walk in circles. You can look at the sky. But you are still alone. And sometimes, even that hour can be taken away. Discipline inside ADX doesn't come with warnings. It comes with restriction. But what rules must be followed to even keep that 1 hour? Surveillance, always watching. Every movement inside El Chapo's cell is monitored. Cameras. Sensors. Routine checks. Guards don't need to interact to maintain control. Technology does most of the work. Lights are controlled externally. Doors open and close remotely. Even showers are scheduled. Privacy doesn't exist here. Not in the way most people understand it. And for someone like El Chapo, once surrounded by people, power, and communication, this constant observation carries a different weight. He is not just imprisoned. He is contained. But isolation does more than restrict movement. It changes the mind. And what happens next is something many people underestimate. The psychological effect, the real punishment. The hardest part of ADX Florence is not the walls. It's what happens inside your head. Days without meaningful human interaction. No conversations. No physical contact. Just thoughts. Over time, inmates report changes. Difficulty focusing. Distorted sense of time. Increased anxiety. Some begin to talk to themselves. Others withdraw completely. And some break. For a man like El Chapo, who once controlled networks across continents, the loss isn't just physical freedom. It's identity. Who are you, when no one is there to acknowledge your power? When no one fears you? When no one listens? But even in a place designed to eliminate influence, power doesn't always disappear. Sometimes, it adapts. Communication, the struggle to connect. Communication inside ADX is limited, but not impossible. Inmates can write letters. They can receive mail, heavily screened. Legal visits are allowed. But everything is controlled. Every word is watched. Every interaction documented. For El Chapo, this is a dramatic shift. Once able to send messages across entire criminal networks, now reduced to monitored communication with strict limitations. Even family contact is restricted. No casual phone calls. No spontaneous conversations. Just scheduled, supervised moments. And sometimes, even those are denied. The question becomes, how does someone used to constant connection survive near total isolation? Power structures, or the lack of them. In most prisons, power structures exist. Gangs, alliances, hierarchies. But ADX Florence is different. There are no group yards. No shared spaces. No opportunities to build influence in traditional ways. Inmates are separated, intentionally. This removes one of the most dangerous elements of prison life, organized control. For El Chapo, this means something significant. His past power has no currency here. There are no soldiers. No territory. No operations. Just a man, and his cell. But does that mean he has no influence at all? Or is there something more subtle at play? Discipline, consequences without warning. Rules inside ADX are strict. Violations are not taken lightly. Even minor infractions can result in further restriction. Less recreation time. Reduced privileges. Extended isolation. There are no dramatic punishments. No public displays. Just less. Less time. Less contact. Less of everything. And in a place where there is already so little, that reduction becomes severe. The system is designed to enforce compliance through deprivation. And it works. Because in ADX, even small things matter. But what happens when someone refuses to comply? Time, the true sentence. Time inside ADX doesn't move normally. There are no markers. No events. No change in scenery. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Months become years. For El Chapo, sentenced to life imprisonment plus additional years, this routine is indefinite. There is no countdown. No release date to focus on. Just continuation. And that creates a different kind of weight. Not the fear of what will happen, but the realization that nothing will change. And that may be the most difficult part to accept. But even in a place like this, some inmates find ways to adapt. Adaptation, surviving the system. Survival inside ADX is not physical. It's mental. Inmates develop routines. Reading. Writing. Exercise within the cell. Structured thinking. Anything to create a sense of control. Some focus on legal work. Others immerse themselves in books. The goal is simple, keep the mind active. Because inactivity leads to decline. For El Chapo, adaptation may be one of his greatest challenges. A man who once thrived in chaos, now forced into absolute order. And yet, the human mind is capable of adjusting to almost anything. But at what cost? The silence, what remains? At night, ADX becomes even quieter. No noise from other inmates. No conversations. Just the faint hum of the building. Inside his cell, El Chapo is alone. Completely. No guard speaking. No movement. Just darkness, and thought. And in that silence, everything becomes clearer. The past. The decisions. The consequences. But does reflection bring understanding? Or does it deepen the isolation? El Chapo once escaped prisons. Outsmarted authorities. Built an empire that stretched across borders. But inside ADX Florence, there is no escape. Not through tunnels. Not through influence. Not through power. Only time. Endless, controlled, unchanging time. And perhaps the most unsettling question is this: when everything is taken away, what remains of a man? Is it his past? His reputation? Or just his thoughts? Because inside these walls, stripped of everything else, that may be all he has left. And for some, that is the hardest prison of all. The first nights, when reality sets in. The first nights inside ADX Florence are often the most difficult. Not because of noise, but because of the absence of it. For someone like El Chapo, a man who spent decades surrounded by movement, conversations, decisions, and danger, the sudden stillness is disorienting. There is no adjustment period. No gradual transition. Just immediate isolation. Sleep doesn't come easily. The body is still alert, expecting interruption, expecting voices, expecting urgency. But none of it arrives. Only silence. And in that silence, the mind begins to replay everything. Moments from the past. Decisions made. Paths taken. It's here that many inmates begin to understand something unsettling. This is not temporary. And what happens in the following weeks is even more difficult to manage. Loss of control, the hardest adjustment. Control defined El Chapo's life. Control over routes. Control over people. Control over outcomes. Inside ADX, that concept disappears completely. Every aspect of his day is dictated. When to eat. When to move. When to shower. When the lights go on and off. There are no decisions to make. And that loss of control creates a different kind of pressure. Not loud. Not visible. But constant. It builds slowly. Because control isn't just power, it's identity. Without it, something begins to shift. And the question becomes unavoidable: who is he now, without it? Food, routine without choice. Food inside ADX is not about enjoyment. It's about maintenance. Each meal is calculated. Calories measured. Nutrition balanced. But taste is not a priority. The trays arrive the same way every day. Through the slot. Without conversation. Without variation that matters. Over time, meals stop feeling like events. They become markers. A way to measure the passing of time. Breakfast means morning. Dinner means night. And in a place where time feels distorted, even something as simple as food becomes significant. But what happens when even these small routines begin to feel meaningless? Human contact, almost non-existent. In most prisons, interaction is unavoidable. In ADX, it is almost entirely removed. Guards do not engage unless necessary. Instructions are brief. Professional. Distant. There are no conversations. No casual exchanges. No acknowledgement beyond procedure. For El Chapo, this represents a complete reversal of his previous life. Once constantly surrounded by people. Now existing in near-total social isolation. Even eye contact is rare. And over time, something subtle begins to happen. The absence of interaction starts to feel normal. And that normalization is where the real transformation begins. The mind under pressure. The human brain is not designed for prolonged isolation. It expects interaction. Stimulus. Variation. Without those elements, it begins to adapt in unusual ways. Thoughts become louder. Memories more vivid. Small details take on greater importance. Some inmates develop strict mental routines. Counting steps. Repeating phrases. Reconstructing past conversations. Anything to maintain structure. Because without structure, the mind drifts. And once it drifts too far, it becomes difficult to bring it back. For someone like El Chapo, whose life was built on constant external activity, this internal shift can be profound. But does he resist it? Or does he eventually accept it? Legal life, a different kind of work. Even inside ADX, legal work continues. Appeals. Filings. Documentation. For many inmates, this becomes a form of purpose. A way to engage the mind. A reason to focus. El Chapo's case, highly publicized and heavily documented, doesn't simply disappear after sentencing. There are still legal processes. Still paperwork. Still attention, though distant. And within those documents lies something important: connection to the outside world. Even if indirect. Even if limited. But how much of that connection actually reaches him? And how much is filtered away? Memory, the only escape left. When physical escape is impossible, the mind turns inward. Memories become vivid. Detailed. Almost tangible. For El Chapo, those memories are complex. Power. Movement. Decisions that shaped entire regions. But also risk. Pursuit. Capture. Inside ADX, those memories are no longer part of a life in motion. They are static. Replayed. Re-examined. And sometimes, regretted. But memory is a double-edged tool. It can comfort. Or it can isolate even further. Because every remembered moment reinforces one truth: that life no longer exists. The body in confinement. Physical movement inside ADX is limited. Extremely limited. There are no gyms. No shared exercise spaces. Just the cell. And whatever can be done within it. Push-ups. Sit-ups. Walking short distances. Repetition becomes essential. Not just for physical health, but for mental stability. Routine movement provides structure. A sense of progression. Without it, days become even more stagnant. For El Chapo, maintaining physical condition is not about strength. It's about preservation. Holding on to something that still feels within his control. The outside world, distant and distorted. Information from the outside world reaches ADX in controlled ways. News. Approved programming. Delayed updates. But it is never immediate. Never immersive. For someone who once operated at the center of global attention, this distance is significant. Events happen. But they no longer involve him. The world moves forward. Without him. And over time, that realization settles in. Not suddenly. But gradually. Until it becomes undeniable. But does that detachment bring peace? Or does it create something else entirely? Other inmates, close, yet unreachable. El Chapo is not alone in ADX. But he is isolated from everyone else inside it. Other inmates exist. Some with similar notoriety. Some with equally severe sentences. But they do not interact. They do not communicate. They are separated by design. This creates a unique environment. A place filled with people, where no one connects. And in that environment, identity becomes internal. No reputation to maintain. No status to defend. Just self-perception. And that can be more difficult to manage than external judgment. Time without events, the slow erosion. In most lives, time is marked by events. Meetings. Conversations. Decisions. Inside ADX, those markers disappear. There are no milestones. No changes. No interruptions. Time becomes continuous. Unbroken. And that continuity creates a slow erosion. Not dramatic. Not immediate. But persistent. Days lose distinction. Weeks blend together. And eventually, even months become difficult to separate. For El Chapo, whose life once moved at an intense pace, this slowdown is absolute. And irreversible. Acceptance or resistance. Every inmate inside ADX faces a choice. Resist the environment. Or adapt to it. Resistance often leads to frustration. Frustration leads to disciplinary action. And that leads to further restriction. Adaptation, on the other hand, is quieter. It involves acceptance. Routine. Internal focus. But acceptance raises its own question: is adapting to isolation a form of survival? Or a form of surrender? For El Chapo, the answer is not visible. Not documented. But it exists. Somewhere behind that steel door. The final reality. ADX Florence does not rely on chaos to maintain control. It relies on consistency. Precision. Isolation. For El Chapo, this is no longer a temporary condition. It is a permanent reality. There are no escape routes. No hidden tunnels. No external networks to activate. Just structure. Routine. And time. And in that environment, the most important question is not about the past. Or even the future. It is about the present. How does a man exist when nothing changes? El Chapo's story is often told in terms of power, escape, influence. But inside ADX Florence, none of those things matter. Here, there are no headlines. No operations. No control. Only a man. And the consequences of everything that came before. The walls do not move. The routine does not change. And time does not stop. It continues. Quietly. Relentlessly. And perhaps that is the most effective form of confinement ever created. Not one that breaks the body. But one that reshapes the mind. Until the outside world becomes distant. And the inside world becomes everything. And somewhere in that silence, the question remains unanswered: is this punishment? Or transformation? Because inside ADX Florence, there is no difference. Others like him, the company he never meets. Inside ADX Florence, El Chapo is not unique. Not in the way the outside world might imagine. There are others here, men whose names once carried weight, fear, and influence. Men like Ramzi Youssef, one of the masterminds behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And Jakar Tsarnaev, responsible for the Boston Marathon attack. Also held within these walls is Terry Nichols, connected to the Oklahoma City bombing. Each of them arrived with history. With notoriety. With stories that once dominated headlines. But inside ADX, those stories don't interact. They don't overlap. They don't matter in the way they once did. There are no conversations between them. No shared reflections. No comparisons of past power or influence. They exist in parallel. Close in distance. But completely separated in experience. And that isolation creates something unusual. A place filled with some of the most infamous individuals in modern history. Where none of them can acknowledge each other's existence. But what does that do to a person who once thrived on recognition? The disappearing identity. Outside, El Chapo was a symbol. A name that carried meaning across countries. Inside ADX, identity is reduced. Not erased. But simplified. He is no longer a leader. No longer a figure surrounded by layers of protection and influence. He is an inmate. A number. A routine. And over time, that reduction begins to take effect. Because identity is not just who you are. It's how others respond to you. And in a place where there is almost no interaction, that feedback disappears. No reinforcement. No acknowledgement. Just existence. And slowly, something begins to fade. Not memories. Not awareness. But significance. And that may be one of the most profound transformations that happens inside ADX. The long future, without change. El Chapo's sentence is not measured in years. It is measured in permanence. Life imprisonment, without the possibility of release. Which means this routine, this silence, this isolation, does not end. There is no final chapter waiting beyond these walls. No return. No reintegration. Only continuation. And that creates a different kind of future. One without milestones. Without progression. Without resolution. Just repetition. And in that repetition, something settles in. Not suddenly. But gradually. The understanding that this is not a phase. This is the rest of his life. What remains when everything is gone? Strip away power. Remove influence. Eliminate movement. Silence communication. What remains? For El Chapo, the answer is not visible from the outside. There are no interviews. No unfiltered accounts. Only structure. Observation. And speculation. But one thing is certain. Inside ADX Florence, survival is not about strength. It is not about dominance. It is about endurance. The ability to exist within limits. Without losing the ability to think, to reflect, to remain present. And that is a different kind of challenge than anything he faced before. Because this time, there is no opponent. No escape plan. No next move. Only time. El Chapo's life once moved at a speed few could comprehend. Decisions made quickly. Actions carried out across borders. A network built on constant motion. But inside ADX Florence, everything stops. Not physically, but functionally. The movement is gone. The influence is gone. The noise is gone. And what replaces it is silence. A controlled, unchanging silence. Where every day mirrors the last. And every night offers no escape. This is not the kind of prison most people imagine. There are no dramatic confrontations. No visible chaos. No constant danger. Just structure. Precision. Isolation. And time. And in that environment, the question is no longer about what El Chapo did. But about what he becomes. A memory of power? A man adapting to confinement? Or something else entirely? Because in a place where nothing changes, the only thing that can change is the person inside. And whether that change is survival, or something closer to disappearance, is a question that may never be answered. Some prisons are built to hold the body. Others are built to hold the mind. ADX Florence does both. And once those doors close, they don't just separate a man from the world. They separate him from everything he used to be.